Okay, let's get started by talking about ethics in general. What is ethics? If you're like most people, you don't really spend much time thinking about the philosophy of it. But once in a while, it's a critical exercise that you need to go through in order to clarify your values and principles, especially with regard to the workplace. So, ethics are the basic moral ground rules by which we live our lives. Ethics is about right and wrong behavior with a preference to choose right over wrong. So here's the good question. Where did you get your ethics? Was it nature, nurture, or both? I mean, we all have ethics. You can't be devoid of it. We all have a conscience and a self-awareness that helps us know right from wrong. Do you consider yourself to be ethical? How do you know? Is ethics situational or absolute? These are very important questions that you need to sit down once in a while and contemplate. Now let's move on to business ethics. What is that, and how is it any different from plain ordinary ethics? Well, business ethics refers to standards and practices in the workplace setting. Business ethics includes societal standards of right and wrong, business ethical standards and circumstances, and finally, legal standards. Wow, it sounds like a lot more complicated than just thinking about your personal moral code. Here's the warning. Business ethics is often more rigid than personal areas. You may be flirtatious in your personal life, but at work, it's harassment. At work, you can't decide which rules are worthy of following. You can show up late for personal appointments, but not for work. You can't just borrow things from others. At work, any borrowing without permission is considered stealing. And of course, you can't just say whatever you feel like saying in the workplace. You need to understand that ethics in the workplace is not subjective, but is clearly defined by your employer. So now let's talk about what your ethical expectations are at work. In the workplace, you are expected to play by the rules, abide by the law, be knowledgeable of right and wrong, give your best effort to the company, work cooperatively and honestly with customers and coworkers, to look out for the company's interests and not your own, and to show respect for people and property. This is what an ethical person does, and this is exactly what your employer expects from you. Although at times it may be difficult, it is expected that these things are done automatically, without prodding or training. For most of us, changing from thinking about ethics as it applies to our personal life to our professional life requires a change in perspective. Think of this as your professional perspective on the topic of ethics. You are a professional, regardless of your job. You are expected at all times to behave in a professional manner. As such, you need to consider your professional perspective. That is, you are fair and unbiased. You show respect for words and actions at all times. A professional listens to others and gets the facts straight. A professional does not go it alone but seeks assistance. It is important that you have ethical questions or concerns that you are comfortable going to someone else and asking for help. And finally, you maintain your professionalism no matter what happens. Understanding your ethical expectations and then seeing how your professional perspective helps you meet them is a starting point for ethical success at work.
So I hope, friends, that you have gained more insights on ethics in general as well as business ethics, to be specific. Now I would like to discuss individuals make a difference in a business, and individuals can make the difference in ethical expectations and behavior. For example, suppose putting own interest ahead of the organization, if some individual does that, then what is going to happen? Of course, in that case, what will happen is the individual will perhaps succeed, and the organization would have to bear the consequences for the employee using the resources of the organization or business. And in that case, the organization will be a little bit in trouble, because its resources have been used by the individual, but not for the interest of the organization, but the interest of the individual employee. Okay. Second example is if the employees are, liars, in a sense, they do not honestly tell the truth to the superiors, then that also uh, a bad feature, I would say, or you can say a bad habit of an employee that would put the organization in trouble, and that will make a difference to the organizational productivity, you can say, in a negative manner. Misrepresenting hours, in which, like, if an employee is supposed to work for 8 hours, but actually working for 8 hours religiously, if he or she spends a lot of time in other activities like gossiping and chatting, etc., then it's not good, and that individual behavior would make a negative difference to the organizational productivity. Safety violations, of course, if employees do not adhere to the health and safety related guidelines of the company, then they as well as the company would be in trouble, and that's not good for the organizational productivity. Internet abuse, which is use of technology for the for personal benefit maybe, or overuse of technology when it's not required. Because as you know, technology is emerging and there are various ways in which employees can use the technology. So it is inevitable that if they tend to use it for the purposes which are beyond the uh, you know goodness of the company, in a sense beyond the welfare of the company, or which are not for the welfare of the company at all, then it's not good. So basically, through these examples, I would like to inform you that how individuals, affect organizational productivity and make difference if they really want to, when it comes to, behaving in a proper manner as per the suggested guidelines of the company, code of conduct of the company. And now I would like to discuss the development of individual ethics. Here, I would like to discuss Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral and ethical development. Friends, there are 3 stages that Kohlberg has suggested. The first one is pre-conventional, which is individual, in which individual is mainly looking out for his or her own interests. Rules are followed only out of fear of punishment or hope of reward. Then the second stage, which is known as conventional, that comes into picture, wherein individual considers the interests and expectations of others in making decisions. The rules are followed because it is a part of belonging to the group, which further, leads to the third stage, which is post-conventional, in which individual follows personal principles for resolving ethical dilemmas. He or she considers personal, group, and societal interests. To gain more insights on this particular topic, that is Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral and ethical development, I would like to show you a video, and I hope I'll be able to convey you the stages nicely with the help of that video. So kindly bear with me just for a few seconds and be able to watch that video.
I knew nothing.
Lawrence Kohlberg's theory claims that our development of moral reasoning happens in 6 stages. The stages themselves are structured in 3 levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. To understand this better, imagine a conflict at school. There is a fight in the schoolyard. Two ninth graders are beating up Tom. Those who watch the fight are at different stages of moral development. Let's see what they do and how they justify their behavior. At stage 1, we make moral judgments based on obedience and punishment. Finn's sense of good or bad is directly linked to whether he gets punished or not. Finn sees what is happening to his friend and wants to help, but he doesn't because he is afraid the teacher may punish him if he gets caught fighting. He asks himself, how can I avoid punishment? At stage 2, we are motivated by self-interest. Mary decides to intervene and help Tom. She knows that she might get punished, but she also knows that she could become a victim herself someday. If she helps Tom now, he might help her in the future. She is asking herself, what's in it for me? At stage 3, interpersonal accord and conformity guide our moral judgment. Betty sees the fight and wants to intervene, but when she realizes that all the others are just watching, she decides not to get involved. She wants others to see that she is a good girl who is conforming with the ethics of the community. She asks herself, what do others think of me? At stage 4, we value authority and want to maintain social order. When the teacher sees the group fighting, he immediately steps in and shouts, "Stop! Fighting at school is forbidden." He feels that, above all, it is important to follow the rules, otherwise chaos breaks out. He feels it is his duty to uphold the rules that sustain a functioning society. He asks himself, how can I maintain law and order? At stage 5, we understand rules as a social contract, as opposed to a strict order. Jessie, who watches from afar, is not sure how she feels about this. To her, rules make sense only if they serve the right purpose. Obviously, the school rules prohibit fighting, but maybe Tom deserves to finally learn his lesson. Just yesterday, he punched a young girl from grade 1. She asks herself, does a rule truly serve all members of the community? At stage 6, we are guided by universal ethical principles. All those involved now have to face the headmaster. He first explains the school rules and why they exist. He then clarifies that rules are valid only if they are grounded in justice. The commitment to justice carries with it an obligation to disobey unjust rules. The headmaster's highest moral principle is compassion. He believes that all people should learn to understand each other's viewpoints and that they don't feel alone with their feelings. He asks, what are the abstract ethical principles that serve my understandings of justice? At the pre-conventional level, Finn is driven by fear and Mary by self-interest. Both judge what is right or wrong by the direct consequences they expect for themselves and not by social norms. This form of reasoning is common among children. At the conventional level, Betty responds to peer pressure, and the teacher follows the rules. Their morality is centered around what society regards as right. At this level, the fairness of rules is seldom questioned. It is common to think like this during adolescence and adulthood. At the post-conventional level, Jessie knows that things are complicated because individuals may disobey rules inconsistent with their own morality. The headmaster follows a universal ethical idea, at complete disconnect with what society thinks or the rules say. To him, everything is solved through compassion. The right behavior, in his opinion, is therefore never a means to an end, but always an end in itself. Not every person reaches this level. The American psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg based his work on Piaget's theory of cognitive development. In order to confirm his theory of stages of moral development, Kohlberg interviewed boys between the ages of 10 and 16. He analyzed how they would justify their decision when confronted with different hypothetical moral dilemmas. We will now present to you the most famous moral dilemma Kohlberg presented to his students. Let's see what you would do. The Heinz Dilemma. A woman was on her deathbed. There was only one drug that the doctors thought might save her. The druggist that made that particular medicine sold it for 10 times the price of the production costs. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, was poor and could not afford to buy the drug, not even with the financial help of his friends. Heinz then asked the pharmacist to sell it to him for half the price, but he refused. To save the life of his wife, Heinz broke into the man's laboratory and stole the medicine. Now tell us, should Heinz have stolen the drug? Would it change anything if Heinz didn't love his wife? What if the person dying was not his wife, but a stranger? Should the police arrest the druggist for murder if the wife had died? Please write your answers and their justifications in the comments below.
So friends, I hope that you gained more insights through this particular video on the stages of moral and ethical development. You might have observed there was a little bit mismatch with respect to the terminology that I have used, and you can see on this particular presentation with respect to the stages. Instead of calling them stages, let's call them levels, because there are 3 levels and there are total 6 stages as mentioned in the video. So I would like to request you to not get confused with the terminologies. You have to remember that there are 3 levels of moral and ethical development, and these 3 levels contain overall 6 stages as mentioned in the video. So I hope now that confusion will not occur, because I have explained and even from the video you might have understood that there are total 6 stages and 3 levels of moral development. Now, with respect to on-the-job ethical dilemmas, I would like to mention that there are 4 common business ethical challenges. The first one is conflict of interest, wherein these are the situations in which a business decision may be influenced for personal gain. To give you more insights, I would like to play a video, and through the video, I hope you will understand this concept better.
Incentives are pervasive in every aspect of society. People are rewarded for taking certain actions and not rewarded for taking others. Workers are paid for their effort and productivity.
Thank you.
Salespeople are paid for their sales.
Thank you.
And small business owners are rewarded with profits for successful ventures. So long as these incentives are well understood by everyone, they work reasonably well. They motivate effort, performance, and social welfare. But sometimes, individuals have incentives that conflict with their professional responsibilities, often in ways that are not transparent to the public, or even in their own mind. These conflicts of interest produce serious economic and social problems.
You can get tipped at Mac, so some people would come in to Mac and they try to return things that obviously you can't return. If you returned it, then they usually would tip you more, but if you didn't return it, then they probably wouldn't tip you anything. My job is not to return stuff that's completely gone, but I do because I'd probably get $10 out of it.
Conflicts of interest are pervasive in markets and in society, and can motivate professionals to act in ways that violate their responsibilities and hurt their clients and employers. Doctors, for example, may face a conflict of interest when they are paid more for some procedures than for others.
Step right up.
Their professional responsibility is to do what is best for the patient, but their financial incentive is not always aligned with this responsibility. If an oncologist profits from selling chemotherapy agents to their patients, and some agents are more expensive than others, this conflict becomes a problem. Most doctors would never think of profiting in ways that hurt their patients, but some may, either consciously or subconsciously.
I run a magazine on campus, and I started dating one of my writers, and I'm the editor. And he started getting entertainment stories that were not as good as the other entertainment writers. And I was like, did I make that decision because he's improving in this section, or do I want to please and make him happy on the staff as well as in our relationship?
When there are conflicts of interest, you can almost guarantee that they will sometimes lead to bad outcomes. Surprisingly, in many states, real estate agents can represent both the buyer and the seller in a home transaction. The conflict in such transactions is clear. The agent could never have both parties' best interests in mind, just as an attorney could never adequately represent both a plaintiff and a defendant in civil lawsuit.
For, against.
Even professors face a conflict of interest when they're designing courses that will be evaluated by students seeking high grades and low workload. If the professor is ultimately promoted based on their popularity with students, will they consider making the course a little easier?
If every single time someone got a lower score in a class than they expected and that counted against the professor, it doesn't really add up because you're not encouraging the teaching faculty to do what they are there to do, is to challenge students and push them.
The key implication is that managers and policymakers must constantly evaluate whether professionals and employees might face incentives to act counter to their responsibility.
Oh no!
Eliminating conflicts of interest is one of the simplest and most effective ways to reduce unethical behavior. But in order to do so, we must be willing to acknowledge that professional codes of conduct, like those followed by doctors, lawyers, accountants, and real estate agents, do not make people immune to these conflicts, and that these codes are rarely a justification for ignoring the likely outcomes that conflicts of interest create.
It's a series of choices, and sometimes the choices that you make are more important than other choices.
My clients, my customers, put myself into their shoes and see how they would react if I'm doing certain things.
I think honesty and being straightforward about those sorts of situations is what leads to the best result.
Before you doing some actions that makes you think twice, really do think twice again, and then consult somebody who's more experienced to you. So don't make the wrong decision, otherwise you're gonna regret like forever. Really, sometimes a bad decision can make you fail in the business world.
There is one more video for you on conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest. A conflict of interest arises when what is in a person's best interest is not in the best interest of another person or organization to which that individual owes loyalty. For example, an employee may simultaneously help himself but hurt his employer by taking a bribe to purchase inferior goods for his company's use. A conflict of interest can also exist when a person must answer to two different individuals or groups whose needs are at odds with each other. In this case, serving one individual or group will injure the other. In business and law, having a fiduciary responsibility to someone is known as having a duty of loyalty. For example, auditors owe a duty of loyalty to investors who rely upon the financial reports that the auditors certify. But auditors are hired and paid directly by the companies whose reports they review. The duty of loyalty an auditor owes to investors can be at odds with the auditor's need to keep the company, its client, happy, as well as with the company's desire to look like a safe investment. So, those of us who wish to be ethical people must consciously avoid situations where we benefit ourselves by being disloyal to others.
So I hope, friends, that you gained good insights on this concept of conflict of interest. The next challenge, ethical challenge in a business environment is of whistleblowing. Whistleblowing refers to employees' disclosure of illegal, immoral, or unethical practices in the organization. To gain more insights, I would like to show you a video. Kindly bear with me just for a few seconds.
At Domino's, our first priority is the health and safety of our team members and customers.
There have been horrendous stories in the press of celebrities being involved in child abuse and the weak and vulnerable not being properly protected or cared for. These offences have often gone on for years without anything being done, and people say, someone must have known what was happening. Why didn't they do anything? All too often the answer has been that they didn't think anyone would listen, or they were afraid they'd be bullied by colleagues, or they'd lose their jobs, and sadly these things do happen. But there is protection for whistleblowers who report wrongdoings correctly. So this is what you need to know about whistleblowing at work. Perhaps the first thing to say is that whistleblowing isn't about personal grievances. This is Jerry. He feels he's been unfairly treated in his pay review. Well, that wouldn't be a whistleblowing issue in itself, as Jerry's pay review isn't in the public interest, and he'd need to raise his concerns in another way, probably through a grievance procedure. Whistleblowing is about encouraging disclosures which are made in the public interest, and about protecting the people who blow the whistle in good faith. But in order for someone to be protected under the legislation, the Public Interest Disclosure Act, the disclosure must meet certain conditions and criteria. Let's have a look at some of them. Firstly, there are 4 types of wrongdoing that a worker can report. These are issues concerning health and safety, damage to the environment, criminal offences and miscarriages of justice, and companies not obeying the law, like not having the right insurance, or if someone is trying to cover any of these up. So what should you do if you become aware of a wrongdoing in any of these areas? Employers are encouraged to have whistleblowing procedures in place, and that's where you should check first for the correct procedure to follow. Another of the criteria is that whistleblowing disclosures must be made to the right person. Jack's just seen a health and safety issue and wants to report it. Generally speaking, he'd make his disclosure to his line manager, the HR department, or through a whistleblowing hotline, as long as he felt comfortable doing so. But Sarah thinks the director of the bank where she works is involved in money laundering. Normally she'd report money laundering suspicions to the money laundering reporting officer at the bank, but she suspects he might also be involved, so she made her disclosure externally to a prescribed body. Prescribed bodies and people are there so you can blow the whistle if you think your employer will try to cover up your disclosure, treat you unfairly, or you've already told them and they haven't done anything about it. So a worker is eligible for protection if their disclosure is in the public interest, they honestly think what they're reporting is true, and they make the disclosure to the right person. But what happens if you feel you've been treated unfairly because you blew the whistle? This is what happened to Helen. She believed someone in the organisation she works for was selling people's personal data, so Helen made a disclosure to a line manager. A few weeks later, she felt she was being bullied by her colleagues as a result of her whistleblowing. Being treated unfairly in this way is called suffering detriment. If someone suffers detriment as a result of whistleblowing, for example by being harassed, passed over for promotion or even dismissed, they can bring a claim for compensation through an employment or industrial tribunal. If the tribunal decides in their favour, it can order paid compensation, or in the case of a dismissal, that the person gets their job back. If you think this is happening to you, it's a good idea to make sure that the unfair treatment is as a result of the whistleblowing and not something else. Keep a record of when and how you were unfairly treated in case you need it as evidence. If appropriate, contact your Human Resources Department and ask for their advice. And you could also consider getting advice from an external employment lawyer. The term whistleblowing comes from referees pointing out that there's been a foul or wrongdoing in a game. But instead of one person being responsible for reporting everything, whistleblowing at work is about all the workers feeling they can report wrongdoing safely and by doing so make things better and safer for everyone.
So I hope, friends, you gained more insights on whistleblowing from this video. The third challenge at businesses with respect to ethics is honesty and integrity. which refers to telling the truth and adhering to deeply felt ethical principles in business decisions. Again, I would like to show you a video in order to gain more insights on honesty and integrity at business places.
Integrity. Integrity, said author C.S. Lewis, is doing the right thing even when no one is looking. Integrity is a foundational moral virtue and the bedrock upon which good character is built. Acting with integrity means understanding, accepting, and choosing to live in accordance with one's principles, which will include honesty, fairness, and decency. A person of integrity will consistently demonstrate good character by being free of corruption and hypocrisy. Integrity is revealed when people act virtuously regardless of circumstance or consequences. This often requires moral courage. Indeed, integrity is the critical connection between ethics and moral action.
And last, the common business ethical challenge is loyalty versus truth. In this case, business people expect employees to be loyal and truthful, but ethical conflicts may arise. I hope from the video that I'm going to show you, you will gain more insights on loyalty versus truth. Kindly bear with me for a few seconds.
Loyalty is the virtue of special devotion to things like your family, your friends, your spouse, your country, your college team. Perhaps you could even be loyal to something more abstract, like the cause of democracy. The late 19th, early 20th century American philosopher Josiah Royce thought that there can be loyalty to loyalty, and he thought that loyalty to loyalty can be used as the basis for most of morality. These days, I don't think we would get many people saying anything like that. And in fact, many people are suspicious of loyalty for political reasons. Nobody will criticize a person for being faithful to their spouse or their family, but some people think that loyalty to a country undermines the impartiality we want to encourage in the treatment of all human beings everywhere. The worry about loyalty stems from the fact that loyalty means favoritism. But loyalty supports and deepens relationships, and we would not have a flourishing human life without those relationships. Let's talk about loyalty due to friendship. Have you ever told a friend something you assumed she would keep in confidence, but then she broke the confidence? Suppose she then said, "But you didn't tell me it was a secret." The problem with that response is that it would apply to anyone. If you promise anybody not to reveal something, then you shouldn't. But a friend should not have to do that. There's an assumed intimacy that involves revealing more than you would to mere associates, and counting on your friend not to damage your intimacy by treating it as public property. That is part of the reason for Julius Caesar's surprise and disappointment when he saw that his friend Brutus was among the conspirators. He knew he had enemies, but reportedly his last words when he was assassinated were, "And you too, Brutus?" Peter's denial of Christ is a lesser form of betrayal, but it was disloyal and cowardly. Here you see a magnificent painting of that moment by the Danish painter Carl Heinrich Bloch. Peter has already denied that he knows Jesus, and when Jesus turns and sadly looks at him while being led away, Peter remembers Jesus' words, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." You see Peter's deep remorse in this painting, but you know there is more to the story. Disloyalty does not necessarily end a relationship. Since we can be loyal to different people and institutions, there can be conflicts of loyalty. I don't know of any rule about how to resolve these conflicts, But there is an interesting line from the early 20th century English novelist E.M. Forster that has been frequently quoted. Forster wrote, "If I had to choose between betraying my country and betraying my friend, I hope I should have the guts to betray my country." He goes on to explain, such a choice may scandalize the modern reader, and he may stretch out his patriotic hand to the telephone at once and ring up the police. It would not have shocked Dante, though. Dante places Brutus and Cassius in the lowest circle of hell because they had chosen to betray their friend Julius Caesar rather than their country, Rome. I'm not sure how to react to this because I don't think I would want everyone to live by it. But it raises lots of questions that do not involve a choice between outright betrayal of one's country and outright betrayal of one's friend. What if you have reason to believe a friend or family member committed a crime? Should you report it to the authorities? What if you work for a company that you believe is causing harm, perhaps to the environment? Of course, there's often very little loyalty between employer and employee in the U.S., but it is different in some other countries. In America, whistleblowers can get legal protection for revealing violations of the law among people with whom they have a close business relationship. What about people like Edward Snowden, who leaked many classified documents from the National Security Agency to the mainstream media because he thought it was right? He has been called both a patriot and a traitor. But one of the aspects of his case that strike me as interesting is that the category of loyalty was often overlooked. If he could be called both a patriot and a traitor, we need a public discussion of what loyalty is. The psychologist Jonathan Haidt says that loyalty is one of the values that most educated Western liberals have lost. And conservatives and liberals often talk past each other because they inhabit different moral worlds with different categories of value that dominate their thinking. Loyalty is one of the values that conservatives respond to and liberals generally do not. This difference corrupts public discourse and makes it very difficult to find common ground for public policy discussions. I think it is important to examine loyalty as a virtue carefully and critically, bringing into the discussion how loyalty might be defended as a virtue and how it affects people's lives for better or for worse. If we want to give up loyalty as a moral category, we should have a clear idea of what we are giving up.
So I hope, friends, that you have gained more insights on loyalty versus truth with respect to understanding that, how it can be a challenge in the business environment. Now, I would like to move on and discuss how organizations treat ethical conduct. For that, I would like to show the structure of an ethical environment, as you can see on the slide. Initially, now of course it's a kind of pyramid, you can say. So we'll start from the bottom level, wherein first initially ethical awareness is made amongst say employees, then ethical education is provided to them, then ethical actions are expected from the employees that would lead to ethical leadership. And once that is formed, then ethical leadership, will ensure that ethical actions are taken, ethical education is provided,
can be to do the right thing, even for people who are good folks. A desire to please authority or to fit in with the group may cause people to act inconsistently with their own moral values. For example, the slippery slope can cause people to fail to notice lapses in moral judgment made by themselves or others. The list goes on, but the underlying lesson is clear. It's not easy to always be a good person, even if you want to be. But behavioral ethics can also give us guidance as to how to act more ethically and induce others to do so too. According to Professor James Rest, there are 4 key steps to acting ethically, which we have modified slightly. First, people must perceive the ethical dimensions of an issue that they face. This is moral awareness. Second, they must have the ability to decide upon a course of action that is ethical. This is moral decision-making. Third, they must have the desire to act on that ethical decision. This is known as moral intent. Fourth, and finally, they must have the motivation and courage to act upon that desire, which we call moral action. This video explores the first step to being your best self, which means developing moral awareness.
I think the important thing is to recognize that there's always an ethical issue. There's always an ethical dimension to any decision that we make.
Absent moral awareness, people might accidentally make the right choice, but they might also accidentally make an unethical choice because they're focusing upon other aspects of the decision calculus and inadvertently omitting any ethical considerations.
I've made some gut decisions with my gut that have had unintended consequences like down the road in my personal life, where I feel like in a relationship with someone, I can sense that they may not be true to me and may not being faithful and honest about all of their intentions, and I ignore it because what I want in the moment is more important to me than standing up and saying like this isn't right. It's really easy to do that in like a personal situation because you think that like I can sacrifice like future pain for like present happiness, which I think definitely has parallels in the workplace.
Studies on selective attention prove that people generally see what they expect to see. If you focus too much on pleasing your boss, on getting along with your coworkers, on meeting sales quotas or bonus targets, you may not even see an ethical issue, which is right there in front of you. The phenomenon that Professors Bazerman and Tenbrunzel call ethical fading, and Drumright and Murphy call moral myopia, can blind all of us to ethical miscues if we're not careful.
For this marketing and advertising class we had to do a campaign, and I personally am really against, I'm against some of the ads that are out there because I feel like it depicts one centralized image of what beauty or what beautiful is. So one of our ads was with a group, and of course all the guys were like, oh, Megan Fox is so hot, we need to put her on the cover. And I was like, okay, sure. And later on, I was thinking about it, and I was wondering, why didn't we just use someone from our, like a normal average girl from our class? Like that's still, I feel like, the same level of beauty, and it would portray to other people that there's not just one centralized image or one certain aspect of what beauty is.
It is our responsibility, as people who wish to live ethical lives, to keep ethics in our frame of reference. We can do so by reminding ourselves every morning in the shower that we wish to be good people, and that to meet that goal, we must constantly strive to act ethically, just as we must constantly strive to gain more knowledge and skill regarding the technical aspects of our jobs. Looking out for ethical minefields is part of our personal and professional responsibility every day.
When I was in the Marines, when I was in the Middle East, we had word that there was going to be a car bomb that was headed towards our base. Someone came by that matched most of what we had, but didn't match everything. Even though a lot of people were convinced that this was the guy and that our situation was solved and that we caught the car bomber, something in my gut had me thinking otherwise. So I spent about 12 hours that day digging, and come to find out it wasn't him. Definitely a case of my boss saying, all right, you've got it, let it go. We've hit the 80% solution. And in this case, 80% solution was not ethical.
Behavioral ethics teaches that we must practice listening to our moral intuition, to our gut, rather than turning all ethical discussions into legalistic exercises, like lawyers weighing both sides of the issue, or accountants parsing technical language in an attempt to justify a position that intuition tells them is wrong. Our gut instinct is not always right, but we would be foolish to ignore it. Psychologists DeSteno and Valdesolo say this: when faced with a moral decision, take a few seconds to pause and listen to your inner voices. Is there a hint of guilt, a hint of shame, a gut feeling of unease? If so, don't ignore it. This is your moral awareness awakening.
We're not meant to follow blindly the ideals of any system, but to seriously inquire about how they apply to our lives, our ever-changing world, and how they apply to the people, the organizations, institutions that we work with.
Explaining that gut feeling and helping other people feel that gut feeling helped them empathize with me and give me the time that I needed to get to the right conclusion.
Sometimes our gut feelings are a good indication that something wrong is going on, and it is hard to decipher when you should be listening more to your gut and when you should be doing more rational thinking.
If you have a feeling that it's not the right thing, make sure you keep working until it is.
So I hope you have gained some insights on ethical awareness from the video. Of course, with respect to code of conduct, what happens is these are formal statements that define how the organization expects and requires employees to resolve ethical questions. And as you have observed in the video, how these actors who are playing some part or sharing their experiences in the video, they have done this. So, hoping that you have understood this concept. Second thing, with respect to ethical environment, ethical education is important, wherein codes of conduct cannot detail a solution for every ethical situation, as you know. So corporations provide training in ethical reasoning. Proper education is provided with respect to understanding, different ethical situations, maybe, and applying different methods in order to ensure that ethics are practiced in various situations. Just an example, they would do something in the training that would stimulate ethics or ethical behavior of employees. For example, in the training, they would just show someone at plays, or maybe just role plays each and well in business environment, wherein one employee is not behaving well with other employee, he is not treating the subordinates or maybe colleagues nicely, and in that particular case, how the employee who is getting treated by that employee should be acting in an ethical way to avoid that kind of situation from that employee who is mistreating. That kind of role plays can be played, and this was just an example. Of course, you can go for various other examples with respect to understanding ethics through education. The third, you can say, level of ethical environment and recognition of it is ethical action. That means helping employees recognize and reason through ethical problems and turning them into ethical actions. This is very important because just ethical awareness or education is not sufficient. Using them in practice or ensuring that whatever you have learned, whatever you have, got to know from the training and from other sources with respect to ethics, that you are actually using or implementing in practice in order to ensure that the ethical environment of the company is intact. The fourth important, you can say, level, which is the top level, is ethical leadership, wherein executives must demonstrate ethical behavior in their actions. So when superiors, or you can say leaders or executives, they behave ethically, of course, most of their subordinates would look forward to their behavior and learn from their behavior, and they will also try to act ethically. So you can say, ethical leadership is also important with respect to taking ethical actions that would lead to learning ethical standards and shaping ethical environment of the business, and of course, getting ensured that the employees, through your leadership, if you're an executive, they are understanding the concept of ethical environment of the business you're a part of, and in general, the ethical environment of the company could result in positive outcomes and success of the company. Now, acting responsibly to satisfy society, I would like to discuss this concept very briefly, but for
Corporate social responsibility. What exactly does it mean? Global warming, diminuted natural resources, the extinction of various animal and plant species, global population increase, and migration. Amongst others, these are some of the real environmental and social issues we face today. How can we address these issues whilst ensuring food, education, and health for all? How can we ensure that economic development and technological progress benefit the greatest number of people? Faced with these challenges, a more sustainable, developmental approach becomes necessary. This requires the commitment of all international organisations, governments, associations, companies, citizens. Everyone is concerned. And in practice, what can a company do? The overall goal is to combine economic progress, social justice, and environmental preservation. Based on its corporate social responsibility, a company can ensure that its economic growth is beneficial to everyone: its suppliers, employees, customers, the local population, in short, all its stakeholders, whilst minimising its impacts on the planet. Depending on the sector of activity, the specific issues and challenges differ from company to company. Let's take a pharmaceutical company. It can act responsibly in many ways. For example, offer to as many people as possible safe and quality medicines, take into account the needs of patients by supporting them throughout their healthcare. And for all companies, Being responsible also means taking care of its employees and ensuring their safety at work. It also means being compliant with the application of the various laws and regulations, as well as defining ethical business practices. It also means reducing the environmental impacts of its production sites and choosing less polluting modes of transport. Thus, the ambition for a responsible company is to contribute to an economically efficient, socially equitable, and environmentally sustainable development, whilst ensuring its profitability and economic growth. As such, corporate social responsibility, CSR, is now recognised as a real performance driver, particularly because it encourages innovation, reduces costs, and brings employees together around a meaningful project. Within our daily activities, both individually or collectively, we can all be part of this evolution, and that's what's really inspiring. And at Servier, CSR is a conviction, resulting in concrete actions implemented with enthusiasm.
So I hope, friends, you gained some insights from this video. With respect to corporate social responsibility, management's consideration of profit, consumer satisfaction, and social well-being is of equal value in evaluating the firm's performance. As you can see, the example over here of Yoplait yogurt on its packaging, on the lid of it, on the lid of the yogurt that Yoplait produces. On the, it shows support for breast cancer patients. So say, for example, Yoplait yogurt might be doing some good activities, providing some funds for research on breast cancer, for example. So this is just an example. There are various examples that you can see when you visit the supermarket. Maybe next time you can see the product you're going to buy. You see the packaging of the product, and on most of the products, the social welfare activity that was the overall welfare activities, either for the environment or for the society, or in general for the planet, you can say, that would be mentioned on the product, which is really good because it's going beyond the profit that a business, of course, wants to earn through the business activity, and of course, consumer satisfaction has to be handled, and social well-being also balanced at the same time. So, based on all these three factors, profit, consumer satisfaction, and social well-being, a firm's performance is evaluated. With respect to CSR, contributions to the overall economy, job opportunities, and charitable contributions and service are also evaluated or considered in general, because they also suggest that what kind of good things the business is carrying out in making that company successful with respect to its social capital, and ensuring that the society is also being looked after apart from the other important aspects like profit and consumer satisfaction, which are the ultimate objectives of any business. With respect to organizations, they measure through social audits nowadays, especially because as you have heard, that global warming and natural disasters, etc., as a result of global warming, climate change, etc., that debate has started already, and there are various natural calamities happening all over the world, some or the other reasons. So, with respect to having a kind of check on business contributions towards social welfare, environmental welfare, etc., the audits are carried out. So I hope you have understood the concept of CSR. With With respect to areas of responsibility, I would like to mention here, businesses' social responsibilities are towards its stakeholders, as the video was also covered this part. But in general, I would like to cover it very quickly. So businesses' social responsibilities are towards its customers, to the general public, to its financial community or investors, and to its employees, of course. So overall, all these are the stakeholders. The stakeholders that a business has, it has responsibility, social responsibility towards them. With respect to responsibilities to the general public, for example, say public health issues are taken care when it comes to, like, for example, if your company is producing alcohol, tobacco, or vaccines and steroids, these types of products, then what to do about inherently dangerous products that you are producing, because public health issues are inevitable with respect to use of these products. So what actions you are taking in order to ensuring that general public health is also taken care of through your social welfare activities, that is evaluated. Then protecting the environment, that means using resources efficiently and minimizing pollution in your production, say, plant, you can say. If you are into a particular product that requires a lot of, you can say, fuel, then it is, of course, like possible that the energy that you are using, fuel that you are using, that is, you know, that is not the traditional one. Maybe, you're using electricity instead of using diesel or petrol, something like that. So you can do that with respect to, welfare of the general public, for protecting the environment. Then recycling, of course, reprocessing used materials for reuse, whatever you're using, for example. Now, this is very general example, of course, very basic example. So if you are, if you have to make printouts for general normal reports, day-to-day reports, then, taking printouts on both the sides instead of just like one side, that is, of course, a good practice. But along with that, if in the past you have printed something just on one side, then the other side of it would be blank, and you can use that part also for general normal day-to-day reports in your company. And at the end, if you would like, you can even trash them. Okay, so this kind of thing you can do, maybe. Or maybe you provide good facilities to the employees with respect to, using clothes bags instead of carry bags when it comes to, getting some breakfast or lunch. For example, instead of using, say, sandwich bags every day, uh, they can use just a normal container, glass container, in which they can bring their sandwich, for example. So not just protecting the environment in a broader sense, but in general, while recycling, you can ensure that the general public is at benefit. Then developing the quality of the workforce, wherein enhancing quality of the overall workforce through education and diversity initiatives is required. So you're doing that, you're committed to do that. And corporate philanthropy is really important, because cash contributions, donations of equipment and products, and supporting the volunteer efforts of company employees would definitely bring positive results when they are done for, of course, public welfare in general, and of course for gaining some welfare of the general public. When it comes to responsibilities to customers, you need to know that the customers have the right to be safe. So safe operation of products, avoiding product liability, etc. need to be followed. Then they also have the right to be informed. So customers need to know, how the product is made, what ingredients are used. For example, if it is a edible product, etc. So avoiding false or misleading advertising and providing effective customer service is really important. They have a right. The customers have the right to choose. So they should be. They should have the ability of choosing the products and services they want. You can't actually impose that on them by just saying something bad for the products your competitors have, for example. So these are few responsibilities you have towards your customers, and of course, customers have the right to be heard. So if they have any complaints, any legitimate complaints or feedback to you, then they should be provided with appropriate facilities so that their complaints and feedback is heard. Now, with respect to responsibilities to employees and investors, with respect to employees, you need to ensure that their ownership for the company is boosted well, and it is ensured that they develop professionally as the company expands. That is your responsibility as business towards your employees. With respect to your responsibility towards investors, you have to keep the communication channel open through various means to investors, because they are investing their money, they are investing their finances, and you can do that through annual meetings. Maybe you can provide them, reports and reports of different types, of course, and frequently you can provide them with reports so that they are aware that their money is invested nicely and it's safe, and they're happy about it. So these are few responsibilities the businesses towards their employees and investors. I would like to show you a video to understand this concept in more detail, you can say.
Corporate social responsibility, CSR, is also called corporate conscience or corporate citizenship. Initiated in the 1960s, CSR was mooted first as a form of corporate self-regulation integrated into the business model of the company. It's about monitoring oneself to be compliant with the laws in the country, to be ethically correct in the eyes of society, and to be by industry norms. Today, CSR has gone beyond the basic requirement to do social good for a specific group of people within the society. Internal staff engagement. This is also known as internal engagement. It's a holistic workplace approach to cultivate staff commitment to the enhanced recruitment efforts, increased retention rates, and boost ownership among employees. It is about ensuring that employees develop professionally as the company expands. Investor relations. This is applicable to companies, stock exchanges, or financial institutions that have different stakeholders as investors. Keeping communication channels open with existing and potential investors through the annual general meeting, AGM reports, or special announcements is another critical dimension of public relations for any such company.
So I hope, friends, that you have gained some insights from this video. So thank you so much. This is all about business ethics. Please leave your comments in the comment section below, and please also mention what other topics you would want me to cover so that I can create videos and upload them to my channel. Thank you so much, and see you soon. Cheers. Thanks. Bye from Australia.